September 30th, and something terrible has begun in Crimea.
Everything is exploding.
Crowds of Russians are desperately trying to get through the checkpoints in panic. Rush, chaos, panic. Tens of thousands are fleeing. Gunshots can be heard. A mass evacuation has begun.
Such explosions, after all, we all hit the base.
Russia is being shaken by new strikes. About 500 drones attacked airfields, oil refineries, and factories.
I'm really, truly messing up, aren't I? You keep saying I'm messing up over and over again.
We have a fire at the step base. Traffic on Fedko Street is temporarily blocked and Kerch Highway is partially closed.
Explosions in Saky, Kacha, Belbek, key military airfields, and in the Krasnodar region. You'll have to endure it.
You'll be roasting there.
The Kremlin is hiding the disasters. The situation is getting out of control. We'll discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan.
Drones attacked occupied Crimea and Russia's Krasnodar region. Explosions were heard in Saky, Sevastopol, and in the area of the Belbek airfield. More than 40 explosions. Evacuation has begun. The GUR and other units struck the Tuapse oil refinery in the Krasnodar region that night. The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed that they destroyed nearly 130 Ukrainian drones. Let's discuss all this with Roman Svitan, a well-known military analyst. Roman Nikolaevich, welcome.
Thank you. Wishing everyone good health.
Roman Nikolaevich, let's start on a positive note, with our strikes on Russian territory and temporarily occupied Crimea. How do you assess the performance of Ukraine's armed forces?
It's already clear this is systematic work. First, let's talk about the scale of our strikes on oil refineries and oil and gas pumping systems. Strikes were also carried out near the significant city of Anapa, specifically targeting an important oil pumping station. Naturally, in the strategically located port city of Tuapse, the large Tuapse oil refinery, plus it also possesses its own dedicated terminal. This includes both the bustling port and the specialized terminal for the crucial transshipment of various hydrocarbons. And of course, nearby is Novorossiysk. In the Russian port, the Russian Black Sea Fleet is currently based there. Plus, there's the oil pumping terminal for the Caspian pipeline, the so-called Kazakh oil. Well, they say it's Kazakh oil, although in reality it's being replaced by Russian oil, of course. Because any further sanctions imposed by the Ukrainian armed forces, if we can put it that way, it's clear that the main intelligence directorate had its base here, in this direction. But the number of drones, the sequence in which the tasks were carried out, the way it was organized, this was already the work of aviation. So most likely this involved the use of air forces. Why more? This is pretty much how an attack is carried out using aviation strike assets. That is, with airplanes, missiles, and aerial bombs. First, there was a wave of so-called decoy drones, which drew the enemy's air defense onto themselves. Knowing this, and here the main intelligence directorate did a great job, really smart. First, they figured out the enemy air defense's operating algorithm, the locations of the surface-to-air missile systems, and the number of missiles in each system. Because of this, they calculated everything so that the Russian SAM systems would practically use up all their missiles on the decoy drones. And then came the strike drones already equipped with serious, powerful warheads. In addition, missiles were launched. Several new types of missiles were also fired and accomplished their combat mission. So we can congratulate our Air Force and the main intelligence directorate on a job well done.
Roman Nikolaevich, what about the Belbek airfield? Because explosions were also heard there. How much damage is there? What can you say?
Well, it's an area target, so naturally it was also hit. That's pretty much how it was, about the same. Some of the drones have already found their targets through Crimea as well, including those heading to Novorossiysk, passing through the Sea of Azov, the Black Sea, and through Crimea. So this was a large-scale attack that also made it possible to strike some targets in Crimea. Well, the Belbek airfield is one of those targets. Although, of course, the task hasn't been fully accomplished yet, because in order to take out the airfield itself and completely neutralize it, they would have needed to work more on the air defense systems. And that would have taken at least a week, if not more, because the air defense systems in Crimea are, after all, quite serious. So they managed to hit our drones there. Naturally, the debris landed exactly where it was supposed to. Now we even have a drone called the Wreckage. That's just so the Russians don't get confused. They themselves are already saying that debris has violated this or that, but we confirm it. Yes, indeed, debris is flying around.
Yes, dear audience, please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you very much. And in the comments, write where you're watching from, as well as a few words of support for Ukraine. Roman Lihorievich, the Russians are writing that 130 Ukrainian drones or pieces of debris were all shot down, all destroyed. What do you think about this number? Are we really attacking Russia with 100 to 150 drones? How much do we need to increase the volume in order to attack more? In your opinion, what should we do to be more effective?
Well, the thing is, every system, even a general system or say a facility-based system, has its own limitations. There is a certain saturation coefficient, meaning the number of missiles that can be launched within a specific period of time, and then comes the reload, which can take anywhere from several tens of minutes to over an hour, depending on the system's capabilities. And only then can a second attack of roughly the same scale be intercepted. So, depending on the density of air defense at a given site, a sufficient number of forces and means are calculated to break through the air defense system. This is called exceeding the saturation coefficient of the system at that particular site. They are different everywhere. If, for example, there is just one Panzer stationed near some tank or an oil refinery, well, that's 12 missiles. In other words, any 13th aircraft will get through by default, because even if 12 missiles are fired at the first 12 targets, there will be nothing left to shoot down the 13th. That's basically how I explained it in simple terms, so you can't really talk about the number of participants directly involved in the attack without knowing which targets are being planned for example, and about what. Depending on the targets and the density of air defense at those targets, the calculation of the required forces and means varies, from dozens of drones to hundreds of drones, depending on the mission. Therefore, we can say that we already have the capability to penetrate the enemy's defenses at any target. In other words, we're talking about the ability to exceed the saturation coefficient of almost any target the Russians try to cover, except for a few. There are 3 such targets, you could say, that are very difficult to strike without ballistic missiles. These are the Kerch Bridge, the Novorossiysk port, and Moscow. So those are the 3 targets. All the rest we can already penetrate.
Roman Ivanovich, so Lavrov has come out with statements again, as usual in his manner, and in doing so has completely buried all of Trump's peace plans. What did Lavrov say? There will be no cessation of hostilities in Ukraine along the line of contact. We have a constitution. And he also added that Russia is against the deployment of peacekeepers. And literally the day before, Trump said that Putin had agreed to allow American and British troops to enter Ukrainian territory, meaning there is a complete lack of mutual understanding between the American and Russian sides. Given this, there is information emerging that the AFU will move towards Belgorod because they understand that it is necessary to strengthen our positions as much as possible today. What do you say, Roman Grigorievich?
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
First of all, this isn't a misunderstanding between countries. It's a misunderstanding between 2 chatterboxes, to be honest. One chatterbox is Trump, the other chatterbox is Putin. They're chattering just because the earth keeps turning. I mean, it's night there, it's day here. Depending on who woke up when, who goes to bed when, that's when their chattering happens. Believe me, that's exactly how it is. They don't even remember what they said yesterday unless it's tied to some basic things, neither one nor the other. And Lavrov, by the way, Lavrov is actually the one who speaks consistently. We call him Lavrokonenko, a bit in a Ukrainian style. This Lavrokonenko clearly demonstrates some fundamental things beyond which you can't go. By the way, that's the most interesting part for us as well. There's such a concept as the legal field of the Constitution. So 5 of our regions have been incorporated into the legal field of the Russian Constitution. The Crimean region, I'm saying specifically the Crimean region, should return to the unitary structure of the Ukrainian Constitution. The Crimean region, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, Donetsk, Luhansk, these 5 regions have been incorporated naturally according to the administrative borders of these regions, including, of course, the city of Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, and so on and so forth. And this is already entirely within the established legal framework of the Russian Constitution. This profoundly means that any statements or actions specifically aimed, for example, at the alienation of territory or at not restoring or indeed refusing to fully restore and so on and so forth, all such endeavors are considered unlawful, a diplomatic return or anything else. At that point, the Russian criminal code starts to come into play. Moreover, there are articles like our Article 100 or 111 in the area of treason. There is a similar article there as well. That's why now, not a single Russian citizen, not one, and especially not any official, meaning someone responsible for certain issues, for state building, none of them will even dare to utter a word against the criminal code regarding stopping hostilities, freezing the conflict, not moving forward, not advancing, or refusing to liberate, from the perspective of the Russian constitution, the territories that are not yet freed. Otherwise, they'll just be imprisoned. If not this one, then another one. And it doesn't matter who it is, whether it's Putin or Patrushev or Lavrov or even some Shoigu who ends up living there in the president's place. They have no way out anymore, meaning they can't back down now. So what happened? Putin, by putting pressure on naturally his own Russian administration, they've trapped Russians in a situation where the only way out is the collapse of the Russian Empire. Because it's impossible to amend the legal framework of the Russian constitution to reduce its scope. It can only be dismantled, just like the Soviet Union was dismantled. No one even remembers the Soviet Union's constitution now, right? I mean, or any demands toward the Soviet Union. Well, it simply doesn't exist anymore. It's exactly the same situation. There's simply no other way out. Now, Russians will be forced to spend their short lives fighting to restore Russia's borders. From the perspective of the Russian constitution, they'll be trying, in their view, to liberate Zaporizhzhia, Luhansk, Donetsk, and Kherson regions. That's it. This is their never-ending quest now. So in this sense, Lavrokonenko is definitely right from his point of view. From our point of view, it's exactly the same situation. That is, our constitution, naturally, international law is simply easier and more straightforward for us. We have internationally recognized borders. As for Russian borders, only a handful of those so-called immortal states recognize them, just a few countries, whereas our borders are internationally recognized. This is reflected in the latest UN vote. We talked about this with you, that something like this would happen. It showed that only 18 countries supported Ukraine's capitulation, that is, the seizure of Ukrainian territory by the Russians. Only 18 out of nearly 200, that's less than 10%. So in terms of the recognition of our borders and the legal framework of our constitution, we also have no right to give up our land. Any refusal or calls to refuse any such act falls under Article 110, that's high treason. And calls for this when they are formalized with signatures fall under Article 111, sorry, that's high treason. And calls for this without formal refusal fall under Article 110, calls to commit treason. So essentially, we also cannot do this. We have no mechanism to give up our territory. That's why any draft dodger immediately falls under the third part of these two articles, which means life imprisonment with full confiscation. That's all there is to it. So the situation will develop according to the only scenario currently possible. We need to restore our territory to the borders of 1991. And Russia needs to be dismantled. Why? Because even if we restore, even if we reach the borders of 1991, unless we dismantle the Russian Empire, unless we practically destroy the Russian constitution through its collapse, our issue won't be resolved. There will be no peace treaties, no negotiations at all. Both constitutions are now mutually exclusive. So as for what Trump is thinking about, honestly, it feels like maybe he would think about something if he had anything to think with. It just seems like there's nothing left for him to think with.
Roman Igorevich, considering what you said about the collapse of Russia, I'd like to add that the Ukrainian Armed Forces Aviation carried out a high-precision bombing strike on the Trobortnaya border checkpoint in the Bryansk region. The combat sortie was performed by a MiG-29 fighter from the 40th Air Force Brigade. We are striking the Bryansk region, and now everyone, including Russian sources, is writing that the Bryansk region will be the next direction for the Ukrainian armed forces, especially considering even General Syrsky's statement that we might still launch offensive actions on Russian territory. What do you think about this, Roman Igorevich?
Well, this is a border crossing, meaning the Russians started to reinforce it, and they did so to such an extent that our intelligence, again, the main intelligence directorate, the army intelligence guys, did a great job. They reported that a rather serious group was gathering there, one that could break through our border in that direction. Naturally, an airstrike was carried out. They dropped GBU-39s and eliminated this possibility for now. But this is a border crossing, meaning it's practically right on the border. The actual incursion of our troops, if we can call it that, into Russian territory is in principle possible in the near future, and not only in this direction. That is, I do not rule out the possibility not only in the Bryansk region, but also in the Belgorod region. In fact, to be honest, the Belgorod direction is even a bit more important for us because it would help cover Kharkiv. First of all, we could push the Russians back. We could enter the Lyceum and the Vovchansk group of Russian forces and also create a certain security zone for Kharkiv because the border lines are too close. That's the task for the Belgorod direction, not the Bryansk direction. If we're talking about the Bryansk direction, then the optimal option would be to move, of course, toward the pipeline, not the heat pipeline, but just like we're currently controlling the gas pipeline on Russian territory near Sudza, but that's a gas transfer line, and about 40 kilometers from there runs the Druzhba pipeline near Unecha, near that same Mamai. Through Klimovo, you could move toward Mamai in the direction of Novozibkov. So movements of this kind are certainly possible, and the same goes for the Belgorod direction. Although the overall objective, of course, is the destruction of the enemy's army on its own territory and the creation of a certain security zone where the militarized Russians will be denazified, because otherwise they'll just bombard us with KABs right away. So there are definitely mechanisms, and they will certainly be used. Maybe that's even happening right now.
Roman Egorovich, here's what the Sharp Journal writes. Trump's plan regarding Ukraine, it turns out, does not provide for US military support or assistance to Ukraine in the event that hostilities resume. Today, I also read an analyst's opinion that Trump has now officially stated there will be no more arms deliveries, no new contracts will be signed because he is focused on a peaceful track. How much will this affect the situation on the front lines from a military perspective? That's what I'd like to ask you.
Well, the absence of, say, American deliveries, because the word aid is a rather vague concept. That is, are we talking about the purchase of weapons, the delivery of previously purchased or paid for arms, or new deliveries without payment, or new deliveries with payment? It's very difficult to determine what exactly Trump is talking about, or whether he even understands these mechanisms as such. So let's talk about the technical aspects. Right now, we are receiving deliveries of American weapons, those that were paid for as far back as last year, and even some from before that, because Congress allocated the funds. It's not even Trump or Biden who allocates them. They can only redistribute them, somehow increase or slow down the speed of delivery, depending on the circumstances, but in reality, it's Congress that allocates the money, and this is money from American taxpayers. And once the funds are allocated and paid, naturally, all these deliveries will proceed. Therefore, the deliveries of American weapons under the programs that have already been launched will continue for at least this year, meaning all the way through 2026. And in principle, with the help of these supplies, we can maintain the current intensity of combat operations that we have at the moment without increasing it and without planning offensive operations. That is, we can conduct defensive operations along the line of contact as it currently stands throughout this year, this period. But over the course of the year, of course, we will need to plan for the next year, even without American involvement in this regard. If the Americans add more for us, for example, Trump says that he won't help us with anything there. But helping, as I say, is a broad concept. To give for free, or for example, under British procurement, if Britain pays, then the supplies will come to us. Britain, after all, can buy as much weaponry as it wants, basically, depending on its own relationships. I'm just saying this off the top of my head. So, from the perspective of ownership, it could already be considered British weaponry, even though the certificate of manufacture, that is, the certificate of origin, would be American. So that's also possible. So for now, with Trump, I think it's more about certain political maneuvers related to pressure on our military and political leadership to make us rush and in a panic sign some kind of peace agreements. Or it's one of the mechanisms to show Putin some kind of willingness to negotiate, or at least to demonstrate control over these negotiation-related matters. To show that he is also somehow trying to put pressure on Ukraine. That's basically how it is. Overall, it's still more of a political statement as far as I see it.
Dmitry Goryevich, look, on February 27th in Istanbul, there was a meeting between representatives of the US and Russia in Istanbul. This is very important. President Zelensky said that we need security guarantees from Turkey. This is also a very important statement. And again, on Friday, February 28th, President Zelensky meets with Trump, considering that Lavrov said Russia is not considering any options involving the deployment of European troops, even though the British, Germans, and French are ready to withdraw them.
As always, they're going against the grain. But what Lavrov is declaring are just their maximum demands. These are the demands they start with in order to end up somewhere in the middle. That's pretty much how it always goes. They always voice their maximum vision, and then the bargaining begins. So we shouldn't take part in these negotiations. We shouldn't participate in bargaining over our own territory. because any participation on our part in bargaining over our territory legitimizes that bargaining. In other words, we shouldn't be involved there at all. Where are the Americans and Russians going to meet? Frankly, that's their problem. I still don't understand why they keep meddling in Europe or in Turkey, for example. Well, yes, part of Europe, part of Asia. Why are they interfering in Europe? But between themselves, between Russia and America, you know, it's only about 3.6 kilometers, just 2 islands in the Bering Strait, and the width of the Bering Strait itself between Russia and Alaska, still American for now, is 86 kilometers. Why do they fly tens of thousands of kilometers somewhere to Istanbul? It's 86 kilometers. Why are they flying tens of thousands of kilometers all the way to Istanbul? It's unclear what they want here. It's just not clear. Most likely they're trying to resolve some issues in this region. What issues in this region? This is the Middle East. These are issues related to Palestine, Israel, Iran, now Syria, and so on and so forth. All these contexts as such are not about us. Why Istanbul? Because Turkey is controlling certain processes, at least in Syria, right now, at this moment. Israel has started bombing southern Syria. They're already beginning to take action. So this whole situation is only indirectly related to Ukraine. And most likely, Ukraine is just a cover right now for their mess in the Middle East. That's what I see at the moment. We absolutely shouldn't show up there under any circumstances. Just don't show up at all. No contact whatsoever. If there's ever a question about dividing up our territory, well, that's our 110th and 111th. So those who go to divide up our territory, they might end up flying here to Ukraine, and counterintelligence will say, hello, good evening, we're from Ukraine. That's more or less how it is. And then arm in arm by the white hand straight to Malyuk's office. Believe me, he won't beat you. He'll just sit down. So anyone who has seen Malyuk knows perfectly well, he's not going to beat confessions out of anyone. He'll just sit down and people will tell everything themselves. That's more or less how it will be if anyone decides to go anywhere. So let them keep doing their own thing in their Middle Eastern ecstasy. And as for Erdogan, of course, he's the one sorting things out here. In other words, he's a warrior. A real Erdogan is a warrior who will now, at the very least, push his own interests in the Middle East. That's why Lavrov first went to Istanbul. The Americans are trying to get involved there somewhere as well. What was Zelensky doing there? Well, most likely he was just passing through, as they say. He made his own point, but once again, Erdogan confirmed our territorial integrity. And for that, we thank him because Turkey is helping us a lot, really a lot. They don't loudly shout about it anywhere. They don't go around telling absolutely everyone that they meticulously built some kind of temporary sanatorium or a fully equipped field hospital. Treated all the patients, carefully packed it all up, and then simply left. They don't do that. The Turks are directly involved in supplying ammunition, equipment, production, and determining logistics chains. Now that's real help, and especially without any demands for something in return. You haven't heard the Turks, for example, make any demands regarding our mineral resources or anything like that. They understand perfectly well that we are in trouble right now and are helping us, obviously expecting that we will help them in return as well. We definitely will.
Roman Igorovich, President Zelensky, said that right after he visits Washington and meets with Trump, I understand that on Friday agreements regarding rare earth minerals will be signed. He will immediately fly to London, where he will meet with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, and other Europeans. Most likely, they will be discussing the deployment of this peacekeeping contingent from France, the United Kingdom, and Germany. First, I want to ask you, what is your opinion on this deal regarding rare earth minerals? So far, we understand that most likely security guarantees must be in place because Prime Minister Shmyhal said that they definitely will be. Without them, this deal will not be signed.
Shmyhal often lies, to be honest. Well, but in this case, that's definitely true. Why are there more guarantees except for the first one? Security guarantees mean nothing more than stopping our nuclear status. Everything else is just a piece of paper. I'm saying it wrong on purpose. A piece of paper, just like the Budapest Memorandum was a piece of paper. Nothing more than that. Any security guarantee is just a piece of paper, one that won't protect you, that won't shield you from an Iskander missile. That's why restoring nuclear status, having our own army, a professional army, and the complete collapse of the Russian Empire, just like the Soviet Union, those are the real security guarantees for Ukraine. Everything else is just a piece of paper that politicians are trying to sign. And that's exactly what those politicians were running around with 30 years ago, those pieces of paper. I remember it well. I was 30 years old then, so I remember 1994 clearly. I was born in '64. So now another 30 years have passed, and it's pretty much the same picture as back then. They were running around with those papers. When our nuclear status was taken away from us, we gave it up, and now so much is coming at us from missiles to planes, and we gave up our nukes. So now it's the same story. New, young, inexperienced politicians are trying to sell us that same piece of paper. Back then, it was Kuchma and Kravchuk who sold it. And I think both of them should be turning in their graves at the speed of sound at the very least. Time must slow down for them there. These so-called green politicians who are trying to sell us that piece of paper, let them use it themselves. That's about all it's good for. So when it comes to security guarantees, Shmihal shouldn't even start talking about them. And Shmihal, especially with his own Shmihal, well, that's another story. But the idea itself, for example, of inviting investors, that's actually not a bad idea. Basically, if certain fundamental tasks outlined in our constitution are fulfilled, when the people of Ukraine, according to our constitution, are the sole owners of the land and the natural resources found in it, when they start receiving their share of the rent, every Ukrainian should get their portion of the rent from the use of natural resources and land deposited directly to their bank card, including from the use and leasing of land plots. That is, only then can we talk about any kind of investment appeal or investment topics at all. Until that happens, all of this is just empty talk, political, geopolitical, whatever you want to call it, and its purpose remains unclear. They're trying to push it through somehow, but there definitely won't be any further action on these documents. When a new government comes to power, be it a people's or a military one, all of this will be scrapped, and we'll forget about these agreements entirely until we create a fundamental basic framework for every Ukrainian. Only after that will we talk to investors who are interested in extracting our mineral resources. There simply is no other option. That's one thing. The second thing that really stood out to me and that I strongly disliked, an investment fund is being created for the future reconstruction of Ukraine. Wait, hold on. Ukraine should be rebuilt at the expense of Russian reparations. What does that mean? It basically means they're immediately writing off Russian reparations. So what kind of investment fund for Ukraine's reconstruction are we talking about? First comes victory, first the destruction of Russia, its collapse, and then specific reparations demands to the territories Russia will break up into. That's what real reconstruction will look like. Because here, clearly, they just cobbled something together from whatever was at hand, as the saying goes. And then, as they say, you end up loving whatever you've cobbled together. That's how it is. They're trying to push this through so the Ukrainian people will come to love this nonsense. It's not going to work.
As for the peacekeeping contingent on Ukrainian territory, Roman Igorovich thoughts, as I understand it, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom are currently proposing this?
It all depends on the goal. That is, what is the purpose of these goody two-shoes? Because I can't call any European country anything else. They don't have armies. Practically none of them have forces that could act as peacekeepers and not run off our territory if the Russians suddenly start shooting. Well, for now, these goody two-shoes, well, there will be just a few thousand of them. Where could they be deployed from? Yes, along the border with Belarus, where no one is ever going to shoot. So these goody two-shoes, there are about 30,000 of them. They could be stationed there, over 1,000 kilometers of front. But in this role, if they prove themselves, they will free up several dozen of our brigades. That's several tens of thousands of our servicemen, mostly from the National Police, National Guard, and Border Guards, who could then reinforce our Eastern Front. This is very important for us. So with this kind of task, by all means, even these goody two-shoes can handle it. As for everything else, well, that's just science fiction. No one is going to station them on the front line or even close to the front line. They won't go anywhere near it, and there's no need to drag them there.
Jenna Mituria, as always, please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Roman Svitan and I work hard to cover key military events twice a week, so please support our content. Leave a few kind words in the comments in support of Ukraine, the Ukrainian armed forces, and also let us know where you're watching from. This is our informational front. The well-known analyst Roman Svitan, Roman Igorovich, thank you, and as always, see you soon.
Goodbye. Goodbye.